Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and the Subcommittee on Government Operations, and welcome them first of all to our hearing this morning. This is a field hearing of the committee and subcommittee, and the title of this hearing is Assessing NASA's Underutilized Real Property Assets at the Kennedy Space Center. First of all, I'd like to thank the Visitor Center for accommodating us today, and NASA for also their assistance, and the Air Force for helping us. Yesterday we had a tour of the properties, both NASA and the Air Force base, and I'd like to welcome everyone. We're actually in Mr. Posey's district and adjacent to Mr. DeSantis' district. We're joined today by both Mr. Posey and Mr. DeSantis. Recognize them in a minute. And we also have Mr. Benevolio from Michigan, who is a member of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. We're also joined by the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, who chairs the House Administration Committee, Candace Miller, and also a senior member of the Homeland Security Committee. The order of business, we'll start with opening statements. We have a panel of witnesses. We've got 6 witnesses today. Someone from NASA, someone from the United States Air Force, U.S. General Services Administration, Space Florida, the Audubon Society, and the Port of Port Canaveral. And we'll hear from those witnesses. We'll go through all the witnesses, and then we will have questions from first members of the committee and then from those participating. Without objection, Ms. Miller and Mr. Posey will be accepted as participants in this hearing, even though they are not on the committee, and also entitled to question the witnesses and participate after the members of the committee have completed their responsibilities. Without objection, so ordered. So that is sort of the opening rules of how we'll proceed today. Welcome everyone again, and thank you for your accommodation. We'll start with opening statements, and I'll give some remarks and a little bit of background, then we'll yield to any other members that wish to submit oral testimony or comments. Opening statements today are written statements for the record. So again, thank everyone for coming. Pleased to be here. I'm particularly pleased that we would have fairly good representation from our members of Congress for a field hearing. Sometimes it's hard to get members out, although today's a beautiful day. We'll have to go back and tell them what they missed in Florida. So thank you for coming and making the trip to those from outside this area. And again, we're privileged to have 2 members who represent this area most specifically Mr. Posey and adjacent Mr. DeSantis. The reason that we've gathered here today is to review NASA and the Air Force options for dealing with either vacant or underutilized buildings or facilities, land that may no longer be needed. The mission of NASA has dramatically changed in the last few years, and we're looking at more of commercialization of the space activities that have traditionally been here for the past 4 decades. Currently, NASA has 144,000 acres, many facilities at the Cape Kennedy Center. In addition, the Air Force has some 16,000 acres at the Canaveral Air Force Station. I think someone calculated today that's probably about 240 square miles of space. It's a huge piece of real estate. And as the mission has changed, we find ourselves with, I believe the inventory that was provided the committee with 720 buildings and structures on the NASA property. And the most recent information we've gotten from their databases, 330 of those properties, buildings, or structures are either unused or vacant. Yesterday, we had a chance with the committee and some of the committee staff to take a tour. We spent most of the latter part of the afternoon touring some specific sites. I asked earlier, and we started this review early last year, of some of the top square footage of vacant or properties that, again, are close to totally being underutilized. This is what was provided to us. That's the tough news. The good news is actually, since we got that inventory, we put a little check, that little check mark. They've actually taken one of those properties off the list. Our review, and I think the members will concur, of the properties that we visited, and we covered most of those there. And I invite folks back to come for a historic or more of a tourist visit here, but yesterday was business. But in looking at what is being done, I think I was fairly impressed with some of the progress that's been made to date, and again, the efforts to move forward with dealing with, again, a huge amount of inventory. Some time ago, we produced a report, actually on the Transportation Committee, entitled "The Federal Government Must Stop Sitting on Its Assets," meant to be a little kind of cute title, but also descriptive of something that we need to do. We're the largest property and land owners in the world, and we have billions and billions, probably $1 trillion worth of assets that are either idle or underutilized. And having this in my own backyard, chairing formerly the Transportation Committee and now this Oversight Committee, we want to make certain that even in our own backyard, and Mr. Posey's front yard and Mr. DeSantis' front yard, that we are good stewards of the properties entrusted to us by the taxpayer. So throughout my time in Congress, most recently, we've tried to focus not only here but around the country. Some of you may have seen our success with the old post office of Washington, which is 2 blocks from the White House, sat vacant, part of it for 15 years, costing $8 to $10 million a year. That will now be a 250-room hotel. Instead of costing $8 to $10 million, it'll get $250,000 dollars in revenue every month, plus a cut of the profits. Mr. Trump's going to be developing that. But that's one of our success stories. We had a power plant facility owned by the federal government in Georgetown, which sat vacant for 10 years, costing about $2 million a year to maintain. That went up for sale and sold for $19.5 million, again, stopping the bleeding and also seeing some realization of that asset for the taxpayers and as far as a return. So last year we began this examination of NASA and also the Air Force property and their changing mission and on this site. And again, I want to commend the leadership of both the Air Force and NASA for some of the progress that's been made. But what we want to do today is really see where we're going for the future. Yesterday, the director told me, I think there were 18,000 people approximately that worked at the Cape. We're down to about 8,000. And what we'd like to do is go from 8,000 on up. Maybe we've hit bottom, but each of those buildings have the potential for, again, specific utilization where you can, in some cases, attract jobs, rent the property, some cases long-term lease, or even sell some of the property, and get a return, get jobs back in this community, back in this section of the state. So they've done some of that already, and we'll hear their story. We also face the reality of a unique property with security protocols and concern, both at NASA and at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and they present certain challenges. I took, again, inventory of where we're going, and also have heard of desires by some in the community to expand some of the natural areas, and we do have the National Canaveral Seashore. We have other areas where we have preserved and protected the environment, and I invited the Audubon Society representative to speak to us today about some of the thoughts that part of our community and state, and again, protecting natural treasures, what their interest would be for the future. Unfortunately, the process is slow. Some of the responsibility is Congress, some is the bureaucracy that we have to deal with. We're going to look at and hear from these folks too how they have tried to address moving forward, again, with a massive evolution from sort of the government running everything to now a different scenario. We unfortunately are part of that process, and Congress, if necessary, needs to enact laws. We'll see what changes we need to do, what suggestions we have, and we can go back and make their job easier in making this transition. So today we'll review what property and facilities are required for the current time, and then we want to look into the future. You don't want to give away the store. You want to make certain that we're securing the assets we need for the federal government, for our space program, and also for preservation for the public as far as public lands are concerned. So we will continue this effort. This is the first hearing we've held. If necessary, we'll hold some hearings in Washington as a follow-up with people that are not in these impaneled here today, but people who do make those decisions. So now we face the challenge of evolving our space program, what's taken place here in the past. Yesterday, all of us who went on the tour sort of went on a tour of the history of the space program from 1962 to just days ago when they've had the most recent successes and launches from this area. But again, I think our job is to carefully review what's taken place and support viable options to putting to use these valuable taxpayer assets as soon as possible. So I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We'll get to them in a second. Let me first, well, we'll do this. Mr. DeSantis, a member of the committee, did you have any comment?
I just wanted to thank the chairman for taking the time to organize this, set this up. Thanks to the Space Center for hosting us, and thank you for all the witnesses for taking the time to come and testify about an important issue, I think, in terms of how this property is disposed of to protect taxpayers, but also the potential that we have for some commercial opportunities, I think is very important. So thanks again to the chairman.
Mr. Benevoli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to say I've noticed it's apropos that two Michigan members of Congress are here, since so many Michiganders have moved here, or I think you call them snowbirds, come down for the winter. And In Michigan, sometimes I've heard Florida referred to as Michigan's Southern Peninsula because so many of them do come to Florida during the winter months. And this year it was a good choice because there's 2.5 feet of snow, and I'm in southern part of Michigan. So, but other than that, I want to thank the chairman for hosting this hearing, as well as our witnesses. I really enjoyed the tour. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from our host district today, Mr. Posey.
First, I want to thank you, Congressman Micah, for holding this hearing. And from a personal perspective, I want to thank you for including me. I'm not on that oversight committee, but I appreciate you including me in this. Taxpayers want accountability, and the hearings that you have been holding clearly are another great effort on your part and the part of Congress to try and provide better accountability. I hope you and members of the committee are pleased to learn how great NASA at KSC and the Air Force over in the Cape Side are adapting to their new roles of facilitating our nation's space program in new ways. Note, for example, the building you drove by yesterday, you saw where they are now building the Orion. 2 years ago would have been considered excessive and unneeded property. Ultimately, it's a very valuable property and very important for this nation and for this area. I want to thank you all for keeping in mind that the reason this 160,000 plus acres was acquired and utilized and currently owned by the government is for our nation's program, our nation's space program. And I'll keep it brief, Mr. Chairman, and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you again, and thank you for participating. And no one watches over the space program more than Representative Posey. He is nonstop in our nation's capital and trying to make certain that we have every success possible here, and also a strong advocate for both our military, the Air Force, and NASA. Pleased to yield now to the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate as well your calling this hearing today. I've been here at this fantastic facility many times over my lifetime, but never in a hearing situation, so I'm delighted to be here. And when we think about the incredibly rich heritage that the space program has given our country and the world, quite frankly, I think it's an unfortunate reality in some ways that we're here thinking about the disposal of some of the facilities here rather than having the political will as a country to really buck up for the space program. And that perhaps is an issue for another day. I know we have huge supporters of the space program here today, but that's not always the case in the Capitol. There's other, obviously with fiscal restraints, et cetera, there are other priorities, I suppose, but when we think about what has happened in our world, and all of the positive spin-offs that have happened because of NASA, you can't put a price on these kinds of things. We're just using a GPS on our way over here today. Not that we got lost, but you get, so you're using it, but it's a spin-off of what happened with the fantastic men and women that have served in NASA. And so I'm just delighted to be here. I think it'll be a very interesting hearing as we are in the mode of trying to make sure that we get the best bang for the taxpayers' buck, certainly. And when I look at the distinguished panelists that we have here today, in particular Mr. Cabana and General as well, we certainly appreciate the service that you have given to our country and to the world, quite frankly. And we're looking forward to hearing all of the testimony of the witnesses today. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. First of all, we have a statement by Senator Marco Rubio to a request to be entered in the record. Without objection, his statement will be entered in the record. Also, I'll entertain a motion that the record be left open for a period of 2 weeks. Others who may wish to submit testimony, other members, without objection, so ordered. So, do we have any other representatives of any of the congressional offices? Just wanted to see. Okay. Didn't want to ignore them, but if they do come in, we'll introduce them. So with that, we'll turn to our next order of business, is to hear from our 6 witnesses. Today we have 6 witnesses. First, we have Mr. Robert D. Cabana, and he is the director of the JFK Space Center and under NASA. We have Brigadier General Nina Armagno, and she is the commander of the 45th Space Wing, director of the Eastern Range, Patrick Air Force Base, the United States Air Force. We have John E.B. Smith, Regional Commissioner, Public Buildings Service, Southeast Sunbelt Region, U.S. General Services Administration. Mr. Jim Kuzma, Chief Operating Officer of Space Florida. Mr. Charles Lee, Director of Advocacy of the Central Florida Policy Office of the Florida Audubon Society. And then we have Mr. John Walsh, Chief Executive Officer of Cape Canaveral Port Authority. This is an Investigations and Oversight Committee of Congress, and as such, we do swear in all of our witnesses. I'd ask our witnesses to please stand. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative, and again, we'll welcome each and every one of you. Thank you for being with us and helping us with our task today. First, again, we'll go down the witnesses in the order in which I introduced them. Mr. Robert Cabana, not only the director of the Kennedy Space Center, a great tour guide, and also great administrator, at least from what we learned of his efforts here yesterday, and also a distinguished astronaut himself. So welcome, sir. What we're going to do is we'll try to limit you to 5 minutes. If you have additional information or testimony you'd like to be made part of the official record of today's proceedings, just request through the chair, and we'll do so. So we'll go through each one, try to give you your 5 minutes, but welcome, and you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Micah and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to appear today to discuss NASA's management of its real property holdings here at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. I do have an official statement that I would like to submit for the record.
Without objection, it'll be made part of the record. Proceed.
But I'd like to use this opportunity to also bring forth the key message that I have in that statement. KSC is well on its way to establishing itself as a multi-user spaceport that supports both government and commercial flights of both crew and cargo to and from low Earth orbit and beyond. We've made great strides to become more efficient and cost-effective, to divest of unneeded facilities, saving precious taxpayer dollars without diminishing our capabilities. We believe our story is an ongoing one of great success in transitioning this storied complex from 30 years of the space shuttle operations to the 21st launch century launch complex of the future. This would not have been possible without the support of our elected officials at both the state and federal level in the agreements that we have in place with our commercial partners. The Kennedy Space Center has had a glorious past, and we believe we have an even brighter future. And I look forward to your questions, sir.
Very brief, but we'll start with that now. She looks very young, but she's also General Armagno from the Air Force, and she was also with us yesterday. I think we ruined everybody's Sunday here, but thank you again for your hospitality and showing us your area of responsibility at, again, the Patrick Air Force Base section here adjacent to the Space Center. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of today's hearing, it's my honor to be here representing Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and Patrick Air Force Base as the commander of the 45th Space Wing and the director of the Eastern Range. It's also my privilege to appear among my colleagues this morning to address the management of real property here at the world's premier gateway to space. Every day, our nation, and especially our military personnel, rely on vital space-based products launched just across the river from where we sit. The rich heritage, geographic advantages, and resident expertise of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and the entire Space Coast for that matter, make it an attractive location for private sector customers. Many commercial companies not only want to operate at our site, but seek unused facilities to occupy. We give careful consideration to every request. We take our responsibility to manage our resources seriously by adhering to national space policies, public law, Department of Defense regulations, and Air Force guidelines. We lean forward to make excess or underutilized Eastern Range assets available when feasible. We understand many government approval processes are daunting, and we've attacked this issue over the past several years, attempting to balance the government's need for information and the need for timely responses that private entities depend on to be competitive. Our wing's front door process welcomes representation from commercial companies, DoD-sponsored contractors, educational institutions, and other private entities who are researching possible operations at our location. Space Florida, who's here with us today, has been a valuable partner and instrumental in guiding some of these customers through those actions. We've worked with Space Florida to facilitate their investment in upfront environmental reviews, explosive sightings, Air Force Space Command, space operations support agreements, and real property licenses for 2 space launch complexes. We're also pursuing with Space Florida licenses for additional facilities, which could be used to prepare launch vehicles for flight. This investment clears several time and financial obstacles for future commercial companies wishing to operate at those locations. I'm committed to working closely with our partners you see before you, the customers we're in contact with today, and those to come in the future, to ensure we continue to fully utilize the vital resources we've been entrusted with. Despite challenges brought on by our fiscal realities, my priorities remain 100% mission success, igniting innovation, and deliberately developing the outstanding men and women of Team Patrick Cape. I thank the committee for your steadfast support of the men and women of the 45th Space Wing and our Air Force and our space mission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now back from a return engagement from the empty and vacant, I think we're going on 6th-year Dyer Courthouse in Miami. We did 2 hearings there, but it's nice to see you, Mr. Smith. And not only will I have some questions about where we are, but where you've been. You're welcome and recognized, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Micah and other distinguished members here today. My name is John Smith. I'm the Public Buildings Service Regional Commissioner for GSA's Southeast Sunbelt region. Thank you for the opportunity to join you here today at Kennedy Space Center to discuss GSA's ongoing effort to assist NASA in the disposal of its unneeded real estate. As one of more than 24 major federal landholding agencies, GSA manages only about 375 million of the nearly 3.3 billion square feet of space under the government's control. However, we have statutory authority to acquire, manage, utilize, and dispose of real property for most agencies. Within our own inventory, we have disposed of over 100 GSA managed properties nationwide, and we've received over $160 million in receipts for the Federal Buildings Fund since 2008, while avoiding more than $170 million in liability cost. Here in the Southeast Sunbelt region, we have disposed of 8 buildings to avoid more than $47 million in future maintenance and repairs, and generated approximately $17 million in sales. In addition to managing our own inventory, GSA is the primary real property disposal agent for the federal government. We work aggressively to identify and target unneeded assets
for our partner federal agencies. GSA also provides strategic direction to agencies seeking to remove properties from their own inventories. We assist agencies by developing a tailored disposal strategy specific to an asset's characteristics, environmental laws, issues, community interest, market conditions, and other factors that influence repositioning of unneeded real estate. When preparing a property for public sale, GSA develops marketing plans that optimize public offering. We use tools and techniques designed to reach a very broad audience. When applicable, we target specific interests. While GSA has the expertise to navigate properties through the disposal process successfully, each individual landholding agency is responsible for making its own asset management decisions as to whether a property is excess to its needs. In the last 5 years, GSA has disposed of 713 federal assets on behalf of GSA and other federal agencies. GSA conducted the majority of these disposal actions through public sales on realestatesales.gov, which provides a cost-effective way to reach a wide dissemination and of developmental interest and maximize the return for taxpayers. Most of these properties were not assets under GSA's jurisdiction, custody, or control. In Cape Canaveral, GSA is assisting NASA in developing asset management, utilization, and disposal strategies for unneeded facilities within the John F. Kennedy Space Center. Upon closure of the Space Shuttle program in 2011, NASA began exploring ways to balance a reduction of the agency's real estate footprint, operations and maintenance costs, while assuring that they retain facilities that may be needed in future missions. While NASA has its own landholding authorities, it utilizes GSA's to dispose of real property. To that end, NASA has engaged GSA to help develop strategies for disposition at its facilities in this site. Thus far, GSA has provided appraisal and appraisal review services to assist with asset management planning for a wide variety and range of facilities here and at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Additionally, we have received reports of excess for 4 facilities. Together, these facilities account for approximately 54,000 square feet of space. GSA is now reviewing NASA's report of excess and will begin the disposal process. Our next step is federal screening for each asset. We understand that the Air Force may express interest in acquiring the properties. If NASA reports additional facilities as excess, we will assist in collecting due diligence and run the properties through the disposal process. If there is no expression of federal need for any of the facilities, GSA will conduct federal screenings for homeless under McKinney-Vento and available public benefit conveyance programs, and depending on the outcome of that review, market the properties and identify potential buyers. GSA's Southeast Sunbelt region is pleased to assist with these efforts. We will continue to work with NASA and provide effective management and disposition of its unneeded real estate assets at Cape Canaveral and across the country. We look forward to working with this committee as this effort continues. On behalf of GSA's Public Building Service, the Southeast Sunbelt region, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, and as I said, we'll hold questions. We'll hear from Jim Kuzma, Chief Operating Officer of Space Florida. Welcome, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Micah and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss Florida's perspective regarding federal property that has supported the nation's space program, but now lies underutilized and not needed for NASA's mission. Thank you, Representative Posey of the House Space Subcommittee, for your presence here today and your strong interest in past work in this area. In addressing this objective, I want to first acknowledge the efforts and progress of Kennedy Space Center has made in the transition of unneeded property. I also want to acknowledge the positive efforts of the Air Force to transition unneeded assets at Cape Canaveral and their work to address processes and procedures valuable to the commercial industry. We commend their continuing efforts to optimize the use of the Eastern Range. There are some very good people doing their very best to navigate solutions to a very complex situation, but there is more to be done. Change is hard, but change is imperative to face an industry and global marketplace that is rapidly evolving. We are focused on a long-term view that embraces and facilitates the spirit, agility, and business acumen of America's space industry entrepreneurs, not just a short-term transition. Cost-effective and reliable access to space is crucial for U.S. competitiveness. What to do with the unneeded assets at KSC is a matter of utmost importance to the future of U.S. competitiveness. The 140 acres that comprises Kennedy Space Center was acquired by the government in the 1960s to support the nation's space program. Federal assets that are not needed now to meet mission requirements are still vital to the U.S. space transportation system. Space Florida is the state's spaceport authority and focal point for business development and growth in the U.S. industry here in Florida. We have broad statutory authorities and a full range of capabilities that are being used to support our commercial customers with our partners here at the Cape. Florida has been a leader in integrating space transportation into the fabric of our nation's transportation systems. Our colleagues in Virginia, Alaska, and California have likewise demonstrated a willingness to assume responsibility for elements of the U.S. space transportation development and operations. Congress has embraced the role for the states in helping promote and facilitate the nation's space transportation infrastructure and directed NASA to reduce their footprint to be consistent with defined missions and resources. In March 2013, Senator Rubio introduced a unanimously adopted sense of the Senate resolution that NASA should pursue opportunities such as expedited conveyance or transfer to a state or political subdivision unneeded assets in order to promote commercial and scientific space activity. We are working with our colleagues at the Commercial Space Federation to offer suggestions for updates to the Commercial Space Launch Act that would enhance the effectiveness of state participation, streamline the transfer of unneeded federal property, and strengthen reporting requirements on efforts of various agencies to promote the country's commercial space industry. Through a combination of state funding and Space Florida's special district financing powers, Florida has provided more than $500 million to the transition of underutilized and unneeded property at both Kennedy Space Center and the Cape. Some notable investments are highlighted in my written testimony to the subcommittee. Space Florida is now focused on the establishment of a space-facilitated, state-managed commercial space transportation capabilities to address the U.S. industry and the need for both vertical and horizontal facilities that can effectively compete internationally. The two components of this initiative are the proposed Shiloh Launch Complex, which will be located at KSC's northern boundary, and the formal shuttle landing facility. The state's vision for both is a commercial operation by Space Florida and its partners under FAA Spaceport Licensing and Regulatory Authority. It's Space Florida's goal to provide a vertical launch site option to the commercial launch providers on land which is not under the jurisdiction of a federal installation or federal range. The need for such an option by the industry has been articulated by U.S. companies such as SpaceX, which is investigating alternative sites in Texas, Georgia, and elsewhere, in addition to ours here in Florida. Further, we believe that our proposed use is compatible with the long-standing conservation uses that have been established through NASA's management agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. With regards to the shuttle landing facility, we have shared with NASA a number of specific concepts and approaches we believe are crucial to achieve a sustainable business model and compatible operations with ongoing federal activities. I will highlight a few points of critical importance to the state to define the mutually beneficial partnership. Space Florida needs the freedom to manage and operate the facility in accordance with FAA standards. We propose to fully conform to other applicable federal laws and regulations, but ask that the jurisdiction and laws of Florida apply. As responsible stewards of Florida's taxpayer resources, we seek a reasonable opportunity to achieve a sustainable, self-supporting business model that allows us to effectively compete and competitively service the specialized users we seek to attract. Other states and nations are vying for this industry, and Florida hopes not to be disadvantaged by the location of a spaceport on a site of federally owned land. Florida needs clear rights to develop, improve, and sustain infrastructure, doing so in an environmentally responsible way for as long as the state may need the capability to support the industry and its users. There should be an opportunity for return on investment and security in the long-term opportunity for sustained operations. The capability of the commercial launch providers to operate independently from a federal installation and range at sites where they are in control of their own fate in meeting schedule commitments to their customers is paramount to their ability to compete in the marketplace. We agree with NASA's IG that the agency's culture and business practices have been a significant impediment. The overarching strategy for the future is sometimes confused. Every agreement with a new facility is begun with a separate and unique transaction with different goals and outcomes. This results in confusing and complex contract development and management. The Inspector General also identified a keep it in case you need it approach as among the agency's response to certain uncertain requirements, and a NASA culture of governance structure that has blurred lines of authority and limited NASA's ability to assess infrastructure needs from an overarching agency perspective. We believe that the best success and best practices in disposal of unneeded federal property can be found in the base realignment and closure process and other transfers of former defense facilities such as airports and seaports. A model that looked past short-term revenue generation options to a transition and divestiture of unneeded property, underutilized property, and its liability from the property list of the services without tails and clawbacks. The model also provided DoD with tools allowing them to respond as a partner where the future of a community was adversely impacted by government decision. GSA has also delegated transfer authority in some of these through a public benefit conveyance process to place important transportation aspects in the hands of a state or local entity. Some great examples may be found in California's Mojave Spaceport and Civilian Aerospace Test Center, Cecil Spaceport in Jacksonville, and the Ellington Field Airport in Houston. All have been success stories economically. Florida is committed to working with the federal government to seek ways to both reduce federal property liability and improve utilization of the land for its intended purpose. This can be done without compromising the overall balance of land uses with sustained stewardship of the environment and without compromising NASA's ability to perform current or future missions. I thank you again for requesting a Florida perspective on the matter we're discussing today. I look forward to continuing to be a resource to the committee, your staff, and the Florida delegation whenever needed. I am pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and we'll get to questions shortly. Mr. Charles Lee of the Florida Audubon Society.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony today.
You're not picking up, Charles, maybe a little bit closer.
Maybe now?
Yeah, that's better.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony today, members of the committee. I have written testimony that I would like to ask
Without objection, it will be made part of the record. Proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I've been involved as an employee of Audubon now for 41 years. Audubon's our state's oldest and largest environmental organization, having been formed in March of 1900, almost 114 years ago. During that span of time, a great part of our effort has been directed toward the conservation of the coastal resources associated with what we now know as the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge and Canaveral National Seashore. The 140,000-acre Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge exists almost entirely upon lands that are owned by NASA. In 1963, the Fish and Wildlife Service and Department of Interior entered into a cooperative interagency agreement establishing the refuge. Today, the refuge is home to over 1,000 species of plants, 500 species of birds, fish, and wildlife, some 66 of which are listed by federal and state governments as endangered, threatened, or otherwise imperiled. Perhaps more significantly, in 2012, 1.2 million people visited the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. It is one of the most popular wildlife viewing sites in the United States and the premier viewing site on the east coast of the United States. In addition, over 215,000 sports fishermen utilize the waters of Mosquito Lagoon. Those visits generated in excess of $60 million of economic activity in Volusia and Brevard counties. I'm here today to present two recommendations to you, and these recommendations come out of the fact that the basis for the continued existence of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge is fragile. NASA can withdraw land from the refuge at any time and could turn it over to private interests or public interests for development purposes. In comparison to that, in 1975, through the enactment of 93-626 public law, the Congress of the United States recognized it was necessary to give Canaveral National Seashore the stability of primary control over the land within the national seashore. Our first recommendation to you is that with regard to the land north of State Road 402, which is the access road to Canaveral National Seashore. We believe that the time has come to move that land permanently into the ownership of the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's significant to recognize that these are the lands that are utilized by those 1.2 million people. In 2012, after looking at the question of whether private industry space launch facilities should be located in the northern area north of State Road 402, a study that was conducted by NASA in 2008. In 2012, the Kennedy Space Center adopted a long-term management plan known as Kennedy Space Center Future Development Concept 2012 to 2031. This divided the natural areas within the Kennedy Space Center into two zones: Operational Buffer 1 north of State Road 402 and Operational Buffer 2 south of State Road 402. We believe that with regard to Operational Buffer 1, it is time to seriously consider moving those lands into the ownership of the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. With regard to Operational Buffer 2, we suggest that NASA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service be directed to review the status of the larger blocks of those lands to determine which portions of this land, if any, are appropriate for ownership transfers to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The second recommendation goes to some questions you may have heard discussed by the gentleman from Space Florida. We believe that it is very important that with regard to those 330 vacant buildings, Mr. Chairman, that you mentioned, and with regard to many thousands of acres of either developed or undeveloped land that could be developed in an environmentally desirable way for private space industry use, south of State Road 402, which would not interrupt the public use of the National Wildlife Refuge. We believe that a maximum effort needs to be made to repurpose those properties for use by the private space industry and for use by Space Florida. We would point out that in the recent controversial proposal of Space Florida to cut land out of the National Wildlife Refuge and potentially close access to those several million visitors that are coming, that the reason given by Space Florida to move 10 miles north of NASA's launch compound is a claim that they can't work with NASA, is a claim that they can't work within NASA's security regulations or within the combined launch schedules of the Air Force or NASA. We think, Mr. Chairman, that it is Congress's role to make sure that the bureaucracy does not require private space industry to be forced into the pristine areas of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge because they cannot align their regulations and launch schedules with the need of the private space industry. Now, we regard the claims of Space Florida with some skepticism. And the reason for our skepticism is that we and the rest of the world know that as Space Florida is making those claims and is trying to stake out its private area in the northern area of the National Wildlife Refuge, space companies such as SpaceX are moving quickly to try to reach their own agreements with NASA south of State Road 402. So we're frankly, in all candor, not sure how legitimate the issue is. But if, in fact, it is the case that Space Florida is being forced to locate 10 miles north of State Road 402 in the heart of the refuge because of the policies of NASA and the Air Force, we believe that with regard to those policies, the better course of action in the interest of those 1.2 million visitors is for Congress to move quickly to make sure that the red tape is sliced through and that an area perhaps to be owned by Space Florida, perhaps, as the gentleman from Space Florida said, entirely under their ownership, be granted to them south of State Road 402 where the space industry could flourish and where there would no longer be the threat of any interruption to the visitors that utilize the area in the Northern Wildlife Refuge. The final thing that I'll say.
Wrap it up. Giving you 3 extra minutes, but just wrap it up real quickly, okay. And we'll have a chance during questions.
Great. I just wanted to conclude by saying that the northern end of the refuge north of State Road 402 has been spared most of the public closures because of the good planning of NASA to place everything south of 402. The launch trajectories don't go over the refuge and the seashore, and State Road 402 was relocated north to actually make sure that when the shuttle program was going, there would not be long-term closures of Canaveral National Seashore. And so we think very clearly NASA's plan from 2012 is the way to go. Following that plan, inserting the private space industry south of State Road 402, and we support that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now we'll hear from our final witness, Mr. John Walsh, CEO of Cape Canaveral Port Authority. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the hearing today. Canaveral Port Authority is an independent port authority chartered and authorized under the state of Florida. CPA is now the second busiest cruise port in the world. Over 4 million cruise passenger movements take place annually, with plans to double this by mid-2020s. In 2012, the port aggressively proceeded with cargo expansion with 2 new piers and over 80-acre container backup terminal region to expand trade and cargo badly needed into Central Florida. Over $70 million has been invested in these 2 deep water berths, with 2 ship-to-shore post-Panamax cranes arriving this March. Eventually, another $150 million will be invested by both the port and private terminal operators. The port today has total direct and indirect jobs from the port activity that now exceed 17,000. CPA currently has a $3.5 billion net economic impact to the region each and every year. Direct rail service is a critical component for a dynamic and vibrant cargo business at Port Canaveral. The Florida East Coast Railroad, which serves the east coast of the Florida Peninsula, is situated west of Route 1. In 2012, CPA began discussions with Kennedy Space Center planners to explore rail connections to the port. CPA looked at working with Kennedy Space Center planners, the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station planners, and eventually 5 routes were put into place. But by process of elimination, the route utilizing the upper JJ Bridge, maintaining service through Kennedy Space Center, has appeared as the preferred route and option. A Phase 2 study has been completed with positive results and lead to the need for agreements with Kennedy Space Center for an EIS with a federal sponsor separate from Kennedy Space Center. KSC would remain a cooperating agency in this EIS. CPA is now working with MARAD, the Maritime Administration, as its EIS federal sponsor. CPA and Kennedy Space Center staff are currently also working on a space agreement to perform added testing, such as vibration impact analysis, so that the rails do not have a negative impact on the prime operations of the base. CPA appreciates the open and willing efforts of NASA staff and leadership to work with CPA on the proposed rail asset transfer and operating agreements. This would be a classic 3P initiative to reduce NASA's operating cost and not having to go it alone on rail, and the port can have rail service badly needed to create jobs, growth, and regional economic development. This project still has many hurdles, and the process to go through the EIS will be able to allow all needed agencies and stakeholders to understand how this rail can be built safely and continue with care for our environment. The port has always made the environment one of our key priorities. CPA has a limited amount of land available today for growth. One request of CPA is that the submerged lands north of the port need a mutual review with NASA, as there is a 1963 agreement and a 1964 agreement that have a 100-acre overlap to each other. CPA has also reached out to the United States Air Force with an unsolicited offer from CPA to lease Air Force lands adjacent to and north of the Middle Basin. This offer was issued to General Armagno, and after review with Space Command has been submitted to the U.S. Air Force Civil Engineering Unit in Texas for an EUL review. We appreciate the General's open-mindedness to explore these concepts through the established ELU process and procedures. In closing, we appreciate the congressional hearing today as a way CPA can work openly and transparently to continue communication with our two federal partners in Brevard County to expedite these critical initiatives. We can create 5,000 living wage jobs in the Port region over the next 5 to 7 years, and at least 10,000 additional jobs over the next 10 to 15 years working with private infrastructure industries. Our mission is to lift up our community, creating high-quality jobs in diverse industries. Good logistics then leads to good manufacturing. This community and the region need the stakeholders of this hearing to pledge working diligently together so our community can proudly support their families, put thousands of former workers back to work again. Nothing replaces the feeling of a hand up and a job instead of a handout. Our area is filled with blight and economic ravage from the downturn of the space programs. We can do better. We can diversify our region. We can supply a growing state with goods and services it needs right here from East Central Florida. This rail and land discussed today can allow CPA to do our part to put those 10 to 15,000 people to work. If we can send a rover to Mars, surely we can connect 10 miles of railroad in a technology that's been done since the 1800s. We believe this is doable, and we share in the responsibility to make it happen. I believe we can redefine our future now, and as new industries grow from this port into our industrial parks, we need to have strong infrastructure to link ourselves to the world economy. Strong communities and economies grow out of strong and dynamic ports, airports and seaports, as well as spaceports. This seaport can be the backbone and driver of your continued help. We truly appreciate the start of this process with Mr. Bob Cabana and General Nino Armagno, as well as the respective staffs. We know we can bring this mission to a success. Thank you, members of the committee.
Well, thank you, and I thank all of the witnesses, and we'll launch right into questions. First of all, Director Cabana and then General Armagno, both in charge locally with carrying out the mission, and Congress has set in an act, I guess the Authorization Act you all did in 2010 for NASA, that we'd move forward with right-sizing these operations, both the NASA and also the Air Force property here. I heard interesting testimony today from Space Florida. Jim Kuzma said there's sometimes blurred lines. I know you're both trying to do the best on the ground here. Can you give us a candid assessment of any impediments or anything you think we could do to speed up the process? We've also heard from GSA. Now, GSA told me, Mr. Smith told us, he has 54,000 square feet that has been turned over to him and determined as excess. That's not a lot considering all the property and space that we have here. So I want to know two things. One, how can we speed this process up? What tools do you need to have us move forward? And if there are blurred lines, what lines need to be cleared up? So first, we'll hear from the director and then the general. Can you tell us, again, your candid assessment of how we get things moving even faster?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there are blurred lines. I think it's very clear how we're dealing with our property. We did an intensive study post-shuttle to determine what facilities we needed for our future programs, our exploration programs.
Is that the 2,000 12 study, or?
It was, and we have our, there's two things. First off, the future development concept that was mentioned, that is complete. It's been reviewed by headquarters and approved. We have our new master plan up at headquarters now, and we're waiting for final approval of that so that we can release it. But we did a study within the program also, the exploration program, ground systems development, and SLS, Space Launch System, determined what we actually needed facilities-wise. And we are divesting ourselves of those we don't need. We took a close look at which ones we could convert to commercial use, which would be given to other federal agencies. Specifically, the Air Force is interested in some at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and also some facilities on the Kennedy side.
So then you say you haven't, first of all, you've got enough as far
we have a plan.
Plans
and we're
in
executing
place.
it.
You're executing it, and you don't see any delay in time or authority.
It has been, well, there are numerous authorities that we use to transfer these facilities.
Right.
We have the Enhanced Use Lease, Space Act agreements, use permits, commercial space launch agreements, and concessionaire agreements. And
But you have all, those would all be tools that you can execute.
I believe we have the
So
tools.
we've got this little list up here,
So-
and since we started this about a year ago, we now have a check off on one of these top 6 properties, at least
Actually-
in space.
On those properties, we're using the one that's checked, and all the others are slated for demolition. So we have a plan.
Okay. So, again, there's no potential use, nothing's going to be
No, sir.
transferred to
There was no interest.
to
We went
Mr.
out
Smith.
to industry and went out and asked for anybody that was interested in any of the vacant
And
facilities.
they're not interested, so our option. Now, you did point out yesterday in one of your demolitions, you were able to recoup a certain amount of money from materials and all. That sounded beneficial to the taxpayers, but again, we're trying to see what the long-term plan is, and I have a whole bunch of different reports, 300, and they're not all buildings. Some are small structures, some are launch pads and other things that aren't easily transferred to another use.
Yes, sir.
So you feel you have enough authority and to move forward on an expedited basis?
Well, as quickly as we can within the system, sir. Part of the problem is, a lot of this hadn't been done before. And each one of these agreements that we enter into is unique to the facility and the customer that's taking it over.
Right.
So we use a
It's
different
not.
agreement.
It isn't just a typical situation, and you're in a secure area here that is somewhat unique.
Yes,
and
sir.
Again, the broad nature of the property.
We also retain ownership of the land underneath.
Right. And that would be your intent for all of the land, or are
Yes,
you
sir.
looking at disposing of any?
No, sir, we're looking to keep all the land as a buffer zone and as part of our secure area. We've also
the
made-
land that the port's interested in, Mr. Walsh, is that Air Force or is that NASA?
The land lease is Air Force, Congressman.
Air Force, okay. Well, let me hear from the general then. Now, do you have the authority? Are you able to move forward? And then what have you done to, again, comply with the terms of what Congress passed, both authorization and also in a recent sense of Congress that was passed in the budget?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your question. I think this hearing has been a great opportunity to get the word out that the space mission is very much alive and well here at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. As the Air Force has flown out old capability, such as Titan and Atlas, we have replaced old capability with new. I believe I have the tools. I agree with Mr. Cabana. We don't have blurred lines, and there are no impediments to the actions we need to take. We have the tools that we need. I know on the Air Force side of the 16,000 acres on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and roughly 1,600 facilities, we do a quarterly review. We lean forward. We have a robust accountability process. We have 3 choices with our property. We either continue to use the buildings with the viable missions that are there. We can lease to new partners, or we have a very small amount that is currently vacant. About 11% of our property is vacant, and that equates to about 8 facilities that we're looking to new customers.
What about the we heard Mr. Walsh said he has a proposal before Air Force. How long will that take to process?
Sir, we received Mr. Walsh's proposal in January, and it is an incremental proposal. It begins with about 20 acres of land that they're looking at on our port side, which is the very south end of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And they're looking to expand their cargo operations at an area of the Cape that could be potentially dual used. We, the Air Force, use that port property to bring in our large boosters and other launch vehicle equipment. We also know that the Army has some staging area down there, and of course the Navy uses the southern area of our port. So I've briefed my chain of command, and we have taken this proposal and given it to the Air Force Civil Engineer Center for them to do an operations assessment.
When do you think that, when we'd hear something back?
Sir, we're hoping to hear something back in the next few months. We're hoping 6 months, and we'll be very anxious to receive that assessment.
And then we've had the proposal. Mr. Posey and I made an attempt a couple years ago with your predecessor to look at the possibility of getting rail into the port. Port's a huge economic generator. I don't know how many hundreds of additional jobs we could have through this expansion, but we were just turned down flat. And we want to tell you that you're a breath of fresh air from the West Coast. I guess you came from Vandenberg, where they had actually had some activity, where they had a rail line. We looked at that yesterday, and it doesn't seem like something that can't be accomplished with people working together, both to benefit. And just the director here, we looked at the line coming in, and they do deliver, I guess, the solid rocket. What do they call them? Boosters from Utah. They're produced, and they end up. We went to the site where they are delivered, and the line looked like it was pretty good shape. So it's something I think that we would like to see everyone work on, because again, this is about jobs. This is about expanding the economy. Not to mention, there might be some revenue for the Air Force. I didn't ask Mr. Cabana, how much money are you getting on any lease? And incidentally, he didn't do a good job telling you all the things he's done, but we did look at like 39A and B and his transformation of some of that, which part of it's used by SpaceX, I guess.
If I could, sir, we have 53 agreements in place right now and more and work. And
okay, you got to toot your horn, Cabana.
Well,
but it's
in my written statement, sir.
It's pretty, yeah, but these guys didn't catch it
but
here.
If I could, I mean, we recently selected SpaceX to take over operations of Pad 39A. They're going to move in there. We should be closing that agreement with them here in the next few weeks or so. We have
the huge vehicle assembly building. He is converting, I guess, into dual uses.
Well, one bay we're going to use for our space launch system, and we're looking at High Bay 1, offering that to a commercial company along with mobile launch platforms. That announcement still has to go out. We're working through the process on that. The orbiter processing facilities we found users for. All the really high dollar value items that will enable commercial space operations, we are moving forward. As John
have you got
mentioned,
any amount of lease money coming in?
We do have some money coming in, and I don't have the numbers for you. I can get that.
If you could provide that to the committee, we'd just like to see what you are getting in from what you're turning around.
In some cases, they're paying just direct costs because it's through commercial space launch agreements where it enables commercial space operations where we're not making money, but the real benefit here is that we're not paying money to maintain these facilities. They've been taken off the taxpayer rolls, saving us precious dollars in our operating expenses while enabling commercial space operations at the same time.
Recite for the record what your operations, you were giving us that yesterday, was $300 million, or 360, 330.
Well, that was in 2013. What we initially went in with for a cost to run the center was in the ballpark of $370 million. By the time we got the budget and the sequestration and all the cuts were made, we were down to $320-some million. So we're managing to live within that, but in order to do that, we have to become more efficient and cost-effective, and we're doing that.
Okay.
I'd also like to add, if I could, when we were talking about, being more commercial-friendly, we don't think that we're onerous in bringing commercial operators in. Our goal is to make them as autonomous as possible. By way of example, I tasked our safety and mission assurance folks to look at what are the requirements to operate at KSC. And we have three models. We have purely NASA operations, joint use operations, and purely commercial operations. During shuttle in our safety documentation, there were 2,200 shell statements, requirements that had to be met. We went through that and scrubbed that. What are requirements? What are best practices? And are there other ways to meet these requirements? And we don't have to tell a commercial customer that he has to meet OSHA requirements, that he has to meet environmental requirements. That's law that they have to meet those. So we've gotten those 2,200 down to 55 shell statements in our safety documentation. We're working with the range to figure out ways to launch in a more friendly manner, if you will. Customers have to meet commercial space requirements, get an FAA license in order to launch. Those requirements are the same as the range requirements. So we're working to make commercial operations at KSC as user-friendly as possible and as autonomous as possible.
Thank you. Mr. DeSantis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Kuzma, can you give the committee an update on Space Florida's bid to construct a launch facility complex at Shiloh?
Sir, thank you, Representative DeSantis. Currently, where we're at is that the Center Director approved that the environmental impact statement that is needed for the actual license would fall under jurisdiction of the FAA Office of Space Transportation. Actually, tomorrow and Wednesday, the scoping meetings for the environmental impact statement, right, are being held both at New Smyrna High School and at the Eastern Florida State College Titusville campus. It's there that the public will have the opportunity to identify the issues and actually discuss a lot of the issues and alternatives that Mr. Lee spoke of at that time. At the same time, we are pursuing the other facets of a licensing requirement to be a site operator, and we'll continue to do so, sir. We expect that the environmental impact, the draft, will be ready in approximately July of 2015, which actually is aligned to one of our commercial customers looking at that as an option for their launch site. Thank you, sir.
And what about Shiloh? I mean, why did Space Florida choose that particular location?
Sir, to be quite honest with you, it was in response to SpaceX looking at Texas as a launch site moving away from the Cape. We did an exhaustive search up and down the east coast of Florida, 5 different sites, and actually the site selected was actually Launch Complex 36. It was presented to SpaceX. It was there at that time that we were informed by the leadership at SpaceX that they would not look to a government range to host their commercial activities. They would do some from the Cape, and they're continuing to do that. But for the long term, looking at the number of launches, they would look for another site that they could have that environment. I think one of the things that has to be pointed out is that Space Florida's mission is sometimes in tension with both NASA and the 45th. Our job is to grow the industry and be responsive. And in that case, the industry market, the leaders, and not only launch providers, but their payload providers are looking for some of those assurances. We're looking to create that environment that they would have in Texas, and that's how we moved up toward Shiloh, which had been identified as a optimum site on 2 other occasions.
In terms of the private entities that were looking at commercial launch, why do they not want to use existing facilities? Why would something like Shiloh be more attractive to them?
Sir, a lot of the entrepreneurs, if you will, they like to be in control of their own destiny, right? Unfortunately, in the past, there's been occasions where a payload not being ready just from a throughput process, specifically at the Cape. A long time ago, it's one of the rocket sat in the building and prevented any other activity. So that's actually, you can relate that to when a lot of the commercial industry started going overseas for that. There's been different activities. The discussion of security is a big one with regard to national security. So when those come in, a lot of the customers have foreign customers. There's some challenges in getting there, and quite honestly, during 9/11 and even in the most recent government shutdown, a lot of those folks were not permitted to go, not on necessarily the Air Force side, but on the Cape side. So it's a lot of different things that they look, but it's really that a lot of them are looking to specifically, optimize their opportunities. You have to realize too that they generate revenue by meeting timelines, and they pay fines if they don't meet their contractual requirements.
You mentioned sometimes there can be a tension between Space Florida and NASA. So how, with this whole issue with Shiloh, how has NASA responded to the bid?
Sure, I'd like to couch that as the tension is really in the objectives, not in the relationship to looking at.
No, I understand that, absolutely.
So I think there's lots of discussion early on, right? But quite honestly, Director Cabana has been very supportive in us pursuing the environmental impact statement. We have not, there are some options as to how the property, what kind of property transfer ownership would be there, but quite honestly, we decided that we needed to push through whether or not it was a viable location, right, and address those during the actual process. And I think that's a very prudent way to approach it.
So you anticipate kind of future negotiations with NASA? You think that those are likely to be productive?
Yes, sir.
Did you want to add?
If I could, sir, yes. NASA's neutral on this. As the owner of the property, we are a participating agency in the environmental impact statement. The environmental impact statement is being led by the FAA, and if at some point there is a positive environmental impact statement and there is a business case that would justify it, then NASA would consider entering into negotiations.
Very good. And so just one more question on this for Mr. Kuzma. What benefits does Space Florida see to the community and taxpayers out of commercial space flight development in this region?
Sir, I don't actually have the numbers, and we can come back with an economic study to do that, but certainly if you look at what before we enter any agreement, we look at both the number of jobs and actually the capital investment. So we're looking at close to, most of the time is between 150 and 250 jobs per the commercial company. If you look at SpaceX, is where they're going to be, and you're looking at an investment from that company of somewhere between $60 to $120 million.
Very well. Well, thank the witnesses. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I yield back.
Mr. Benevolio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In a 2013 review that NASA Inspector General reported that since 2005, the agency's operations and maintenance costs have increased by $173 million, or 44%. As of 2010, NASA had over $2.6 billion in annual deferred maintenance costs. According to the Inspector General, in 2013, NASA continues to retain real property that is underutilized, does not have identified future mission uses, or is duplicative of other assets in its real property inventory. In 2012, an internal agency-wide NASA review estimated that the agency may have as many as 865 unneeded, or I heard 720 now, is that facilities with maintenance costs of over $24 million annually. Mr. Cabana, according to NASA Inspector General, NASA's operations maintenance costs have increased by 44% since 2025. What is the cause of any rising costs you see here at Kennedy?
So at KSC, I should say that we took it very seriously, what's in that report, and we're looking very closely again at what facilities we need, and we are divesting ourselves of those that we do not need. Obviously, with an aging infrastructure, maintenance costs continue to rise over time, and we're constantly repairing water lines and so on as we upgrade. In many cases, it makes much more sense to demolish an old facility and build something new. For example, our new Propellants North facility is a LEEDs Platinum facility. It actually generates more electricity than it uses. It puts energy on the grid, and we get our electricity for free at night in that facility. So that's what we're doing. We're identifying the facilities that we need and getting rid of those that we don't, and trying to be very efficient in how we do it. The chairman asked earlier how much rent we were getting. And again, this isn't profit. It covers, the direct costs of those facilities also. But with our current agreements, we have $580,000 a year coming in rent on those facilities. Again, that covers our costs to help provide the services that we do to those facilities also. But again, it takes them off our rolls where we're not paying those maintenance costs, which are.
Now, I'm new at understanding this bureaucratic process. Maybe you can help me here. When you identify a building or buildings that are going to be mothballed, abandoned, or disposed, they go to the GSA, correct? You would notify them to GSA, is that correct?
It depends. Only if we were going to sell it or if we were going to transfer it to another agency. And we're not actually selling the buildings. We're keeping them in either getting a use agreement for them, an enhanced use lease, a Space Act agreement, and they have to be something that would help enable commercial operations, space operations at the Cape,
right,
part of our mission.
The point, what I'm trying to get to is, what's the process, the time frame it takes? Like, you have to notify GSA, do I understand this correctly, that you're going to put this building up for rent or make it available to private enterprise that must meet certain requirements that you've set, right? So how long does it take for before you come to the conclusion that nobody's interested and it's time to demolish the building?
I think it depends on the facility and the studies that are being done. I'd have to defer to our representative from the GSA how long it takes to get through the process.
Mr. Smith, he notifies you that this building, we'd like to put this building up for sale or lease, or well, for lease, and what's your process to advertise? And
but sir, I should add, we're not going through the GSA to lease our buildings.
Okay.
We're utilizing the GSA to transfer between federal agencies. So those facilities at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station that are NASA facilities. My goal is to remove ourselves as much as possible from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and just have the NASA facilities at Kennedy Space Center. So those facilities that we're transferring, we have to do that through the GSA.
So you have a limited market to lease these buildings.
Yes, sir.
How long does that take to see if anybody's interested, and if not, when you determine that it's going to be demolished, what's that process? What's the time frame?
It could take, as long as a year. It depends. Again, if we're going to demolish a facility, we have to have the funds to do that. So we have to work through NASA headquarters and our budget process in order through our construction of facilities and the facilities maintenance folks.
Okay, so you don't have a customer, now you want to demolish the building.
If I identified it now, it would get put in the list of priorities at NASA as to what facilities where had the highest priority for the funds that were available in that budget year to provide it. So it may be next year, it may be the year after that. In the meantime, if it were not able to be demolished right away, it would be abandoned. It would be put in a safe state where we're not investing money to maintain it, knowing that it's going to be demolished.
Thank you very much. With that, Chairman, are you back?
Thank you. Ms. Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I thank you for calling this hearing this morning. I think, and I so much appreciate the premise of the hearing, but I also think that we can't be too hasty about certainly accessing property on this facility either. I mean, leasing buildings is one thing. Those can be, leases can be stopped or they elapse or what have you, but I think turning property over or actually accessing property to the Department of Interior has been suggested by one of some testimony this morning, I think is totally something else, because I think that could be very short-sighted by the nation. I think that optimally the space program will begin really ratcheting back up at some point. I mean, there's always an ebb and flow to these kinds of things. There's an ebb and flow to the economics, et cetera. And the space program, in my mind, needs to be, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the Congress needs to think about ratcheting it up, revving it up, a bit more, and it's not just some romantic concept, the space program. It is a critical component of our nation's ability to be positioned globally in the economic footprint. And when we think about STEM and some of the other kinds of things that have to be happening in our educational system. So I would say this, as we had an opportunity yesterday to tour, one of the things I heard from General Armano, as well as in particular Mr. Cabana, was about the partnerships. That seemed to be sort of an operative phrase throughout the tour, partnerships with some of your commercial ventures, et cetera. But I think as we face the challenges really of utilizing the real estate here, obviously one of the priority issues must be security and how you can secure all of your facilities here and make sure you're protecting the taxpayers' assets, et cetera. But as has also been talked about here, and I guess this is sort of goes to my question a bit, is when you think about the economic identity of the Space Coast here, two biggest components, well, tourism certainly, but much of it is Nassau, and also the port, and what has been happening at the port is incredible in a very fantastic way. And so how can is there more that can be done? And it's been talked about the ELU, the enhanced land use that I'm pleased to see is going through some of the process there. I've had some experience with that at a base in my facility, and it's part of the total living experience getting through that bureaucracy. So good luck with all of that. But I think as we think about the potential or the possibility of a rail spur, the first thing that you would think about would be the security concerns about that, and I'm appreciative of that. I sit on the rail subcommittee on the transportation infrastructure, but really one of my primary responsibilities in the Congress is sitting on Homeland Security, the vice chair of the House Homeland Security. So I'm very familiar with the kinds of new technologies that have been utilized for rail security. And believe me, it can happen. You could be at an extremely high level of confidence about the security of a rail spur coming out of the port. And I just sort of throw that out there because when you think about the Panama Canal being expanded, I know that's part of the overall long-term master plan for the region here so that you're able to accommodate the larger salties. And having an intermodal component is a very important thing, obviously, for the entire region. So I would just mention as well about what your thoughts are about the security concerns for the possibility of a rail spur coming, well, utilizing the existing rail through here. Throw that out.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm still waiting to see the results of the study, and after the study's complete, then we can make an informed decision. Okay. I'm still waiting to see the results of the study, and after the study's complete, then we'll be able to make an informed decision. It will also require an environmental impact statement, but we're going to work with the port to see how we could get to accommodating that. And you know, the rail, as it goes right now, doesn't reach as far as it needs to. We'd have to provide access. The port's going to have to figure out how to get from where the rail ends the rest of the way to the port. But we have easements with in a number of our agreements. I'm sure it's something that we'd be able to work if this ends up being the right thing to do. But it's still in the study phase, but we're very cautiously optimistic that we'll get to a solution that's of benefit to both of us. So I'm looking forward to the results of that study. And I believe that we can make security work. You know, we'll figure out how to do that. Security is a huge concern. That goes into who we allow on site, what companies that we allow in. We don't just allow anybody in, and you know, that is extremely important when you're dealing with the assets that we're dealing with. But we've also, and I'll mention, you know, we have an agreement with Space Florida for Exploration Park. It's a research and development park on NASA property, but outside the secure perimeter that allows easier access for foreign nationals and so on. And they are hopefully going to be building, right now it's anchored with the Space Life Sciences Lab, but soon another building is going to be added, and hopefully that will grow into an area where commercial companies can operate, can build, and be in close proximity to the Space Center without actually being inside the secure perimeter. So security is a very important concern.
Thank you. And if I could, General, I'm going to ask you another question since I have a limited amount of time here. You were indicating yesterday in the tour about the drone that was here, the land station and the drone for the Customs and Border Protection, the CBP. I think as we think about future BRACs, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission, I mean, the country might not have the stomach right now for another BRAC, but there will be another BRAC. Another BRAC is going to come. And I think as you look at what could happen here, even on Patrick, really, but the idea of the total force concept of the partnerships again, with the Department of Homeland Security, I often tell the secretaries of Homeland Security that they've missed the boat many times with these BRACs by not being proactive, by looking at some of the existing properties, particularly geographically sited around the country, for more of the components of Homeland Security. And I don't know about the drone, but there are, I think, various kinds of things when you think about the maritime environment, the kind of challenges that we're all facing, whether it be the Coast Guard or the CBP, Air Force, et cetera. Not only national security, but Homeland Security, about the potential of utilizing some of the facilities here. So then you're not really looking at a commercial partner, but another agency partnership that I think could be useful in the immediacy and also long-term planning to think about BRACs. Because I'll tell you, the next BRAC, total force concept, is going to be a critical element of that. They are going to look at not just one element of DOD, or they'll look at other agencies and those kinds of things when they look at the facilities throughout the inventory, domestically in particular, I think. You have any comment on that, General?
Thank you, Congresswoman Miller. I do. You know, we work closely with our mission partners even today, and we, you know, together are ensuring the viability of the space program here. But even beyond the space program, we have already a joint force with us, if you will. The Navy is on Cape Canaveral already. That is NO2, the Naval Operations Test Unit. They test the Trident missile force. We work with the Army. They have land down around the port, as well as the Coast Guard has a squadron down there around the port. We already work with the Department of State, who has a flying unit at Patrick Air Force Base, where they do a lot of the maritime interdiction, drug interdiction, and even other kinds of flying in combat areas, but they keep their aircraft at Patrick. So I know that we have, you know, great property with a lot of potential, a great place to fly, if you will, certainly a great place to launch rockets. But for any new customer that comes to us, we have to look at mission compatibility. I'm entrusted with one mission, and that has to come first. And so we have to look at the safety, not only of the incoming customer, but the public safety that I'm entrusted with for the space launch business. We look at security as well. We look at encroachment. Environmental issues are very important to us, as well as radio frequency emissions. We can't interfere in radio wave speak with the way we do business as well. So while we think that there's a lot of opportunity, I also have to balance the fact that I can't decrease the value of the military value of Patrick or Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Posey.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, not only for this hearing, but also the time that you have taken and the members here have taken to get up to speed on some of these subjects. They're not something that typically a member of Congress goes around having a knowledge of what's going on at this port, what's going on at this space center, what's going on at this Cape. And I appreciate the members' time and interest they took to prepare themselves for this hearing today. Accountability is something that our citizens want, Unfortunately, many times elected officials, in general, Congress in particular, are too busy to give any attention to accountability. There are other important matters that seem more on the boiler at the time, but you have been diligent in trying to bring better accountability, and I'm very grateful to you for that. The same can be said for space. Not, as you've seen by voting trends in the past, there is really not a whole lot of overwhelming, at least, support in Congress for our nation's space program. Even though it is a matter of our national security, it is a matter of our technological and economic advancement in this nation, and ultimately it will be responsible for the survival of our species. I recently was honored to hear a lecture by Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I think is one of the most amazing ambassadors for space program. And he brought out the point that funding for space is probably the only thing that Congress does that entirely is beneficial to the next generation. Most of the other money that we spend solve problems on Earth and in America or around the world for this generation here and now. Very little we do is truly focused on future generations, and space is one of that point of focus. I wish and hope that someday we can make a commitment to our space program, maybe 1% of our budget for 25 years, straight line, so you can have some idea of what the future is going to be, so we can properly plan and prepare for future space endeavors. I want to again go on record that I strongly support whatever efforts it takes to get rail services the chairman has long had an interest in, and as Ms. Miller has mentioned earlier here today, to our port. I don't think that should be something that's unachievable, you know, given the fact that we could put men on the moon and bring them back within a 10-year span. We've had about 40 years to get a rail spur to the Cape, and I don't think that should be a superhuman feat if we focus proper attention on it. And so I appreciate you giving me the time to participate in this hearing and to comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Let me go over a couple of questions here. Okay, so we have this 2002 plan and the plan that you referred to, Mr. Director, and Mr. Lee said that that plan really looks at divesting, at least to mother preservation or Mother Nature's stewardship, the land north of 402. Is that correct?
Sir, our plan does not, there is no plan for any NASA development north of 402.
But then we have the Shiloh project. That's north of 402?
Yes, that's
okay.
Space Florida.
Okay. And I understand that the firm that's looking at that is looking at also acquiring land. Would that be title land? Could that be title land to them, or leased land? I thought you had said everything had to be leased.
If we were to do it, we would not want to give up ownership of that land.
Okay. But it would appear to me that there might be space below 402 for that type of activity, keeping what Mr. Lee's come to request sort of pristine from that type of development. Is that a possibility, or is that being looked at?
In our master plan, we have looked at another launch site just north of pad 39B. It would be, you could call it 39C or some other name, but we have looked at the possibility of developing a launch
Bringing
site
that
there.
closer to the 402. I noticed 402 does, we've got it up here.
Right. It would be closer to it, but it would be on the south side of it.
Okay, okay. That would make Mr. Lee happy. The record would reflect he's got two thumbs up and a grin on his face. Well, again, you know, And it's amazing how things change. Mr. DeSantis has the area in Volusia County, Canaveral National Seashore Park. The biggest thing I had, Ron, to worry about, which was more than, well, my first 10 years, was the new bathing on the beach there. And now you guys have acquired the responsibility of this transition. This is a huge piece of property. I mean, this is, I asked them, how big is Manhattan? And what is it, 37 square miles? This is 240 square miles, just your part, not the Air Force. And it stretches a long way. It's got a lot of value. And you don't want to be short-sighted. I mean, I have two strong advocates over here. Well, the whole panel, I think, are strong advocates for the space program. We don't want to leave ourselves short-sighted for the future. But you feel that the plan that was adopted in 2012, again, utilizing that land south of 402, would be sufficient to carry our mission to any foreseeable future. Director in general.
The plan?
Yes, no?
For NASA's needs, yes.
General?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. I am not familiar with the plan because that is not
Okay.
Air
All
Force
right.
property.
Well, I want you to look at the plan and then comment for the record. You got 2 weeks to do that. Report back, okay?
Yes,
And
sir.
if you have to go above, ask them if they think it's adequate. And then if there's anything disposable that you can dispose of, or, of course, no one wants to preclude what's been talked about here for economic development at the port. That's a big economic generator. We heard Guzman testify, 250 jobs. You gave the amount of investment. Walsh, what kind of jobs could we have if we had the port connection and the additional land there? Guesstimate.
Our projections are 5,000 within the next
5,000.
5 to 7.
My goal would be, we've gone from 18,000 down to 8,000, and I think you started, actually, he didn't take credit for it, the director didn't, but we hit bottom, and now we are employing people using some of these facilities. So our goal would be get it past that 18,000, not only with a space activity, but also other economic potential. So that's a very significant figure. All right, GSA. You had the 54,000, and here again the director didn't give himself much credit. You showed us a building yesterday that you were transferring other government activities into. How big was that space, and what's the director?
Yeah, which one? I'm trying to remember.
I don't know, but you were telling us that you had moved into another agency into a building, and it was going to occupy. Was that one of yours?
No, what I was talking about was we were moving into, I took my engineering team and consolidated. I moved all my engineering directorate.
That was the building
into
across.
the newer building.
Is that the one across from the vehicle assembly? No,
Yes,
but
sir.
we passed another building, and I thought you said that they were going to have someone come into that from another agency.
That was a building also that we've leased with Space Florida that was part of the OPF Bay 3. where
Okay, so
Boeing
that's
is
a
gonna be
private.
utilizing
That's a
that.
private
Yes, sir.
lease.
That's a private company.
Okay, then Smith, you got 54,000 square feet from him.
Yes, sir.
How long have you had it?
I think the report of access came about January timeframe.
When? This year?
This year.
Okay. I hope some of that's prompted by the action of the committee. But Smith, I'm sure I'll see you again, and I'll be asking you the status of making that available or whatever we're going to do with it. And since I've got you here for another one, I think we're making some progress on the Dyer Courthouse. We're 6 or 7 years now vacant in Miami.
Sir, we're working with Miami-Dade College.
I appreciate that. I got the report back. They are interested in a potential lease. How long do you think that's all going to take to review and get a decision on?
We're supposed to sit down with them. We're looking for a good win-win situation.
Could you tell me, the committee, provide me in the next 2 weeks when you plan to sit down with them, and then give me chronological order and for submission in this record as to what time frame you think that could be accomplished?
I will.
Okay, I just had Dr. Padron and others that this is a vacant courthouse. I think we're going 6 or 7 years now in Miami, and we've had 2 hearings, one at the community college, which is across the street from the vacant federal courthouse, where we did our first hearing about 2 years ago. We're going on? It's getting up to 2 years, yeah. All right, so again, sorry to give you a hard time, Mr. Smith. That's what I'm getting paid for. But right-sizing this property is a challenge both for NASA and also for the Air Force. Now, let's go back to Kuzman. Did you tell us if you, from the outside, you've had to deal with this in a big way, getting your foothold here. Anything we can do to speed up the process, your recommendation? They're not going to cancel your lease, at least not this week, so just be frank with us. You'd be surprised how hard it is to get people to testify. I mean, really, it is. I mean, we've done some of these federal property, and I can't get a witness. I've offered a bag over their head and a screen, and they won't come near us to talk because they're afraid of retribution from either GSA or some federal agency. But you've got a pass here. Go ahead and tell us anything positive that would help the process from what you've seen.
Thank you, sir. I think one of the things that may get lost at times is that Space Florida is accountable to the Office of the Governor, so our requirements are a little different than some of our federal partners. And we're looking at that partnership between the two to be beneficial to us, right, to be able to track those customers and different things. And I think you may have used a great example with 6 years for a building. All the buildings, I think that many of the buildings that the director showed you, OPF 1, OPF 3, right, the ONC building, Launch Complex 41 that was modified for ELV, the Space Life Science Lab, right, the ROV hangar at the Shuttle Landing Facility, all those, right, were in fact Space Florida, where Florida has put resource in there to draw those companies here. And so it's tough to transition those facilities. You have to find the right partners. We do a lot of due diligence, all those too. So I would just ask.
It's been, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And 3 years is the last launch, was it, out of 39? Yeah. But again, my question for the record is there anything you can recommend to the committee? We'll go back, look at legislation, we'll look at kicking agencies in the tail to move them forward, whatever it takes. Anything you want to offer today?
Sir, I think we look.
Or you could submit for the record if you don't want to.
I think I'd like to submit for the record.
Okay.
Thank you for that option, sir.
All right. Well, again, our goal here is to take this incredible national treasure. It's got a little bit of rust and a little mold from some of it sitting idle, but to brush it off and to see what we can do with it to turn it into the very best asset for the taxpayers, and then hopefully get jobs and economic activity, get the private sector involved as they should be in the space mission as a good partner. And then from our defense standpoint, this is a very important asset and maximizing that too. Finally, General, how many launch pads are empty and how many are being used, just for the record?
Mr. Chairman, there are a total of, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, there are a total of 47 launch pads. Of those, 3 are active on the Air Force side. 2 are NASA's, 39A and B. 9 were never built. 6 are National Historic Landmarks right now and inactive. And there are 20 that are deemed inactive, but we did a review of those 20, and only 8 of them are unencumbered by other activities going on the base.
Well, I mentioned that, so it's in the record so people know and they can contact you. Some of the hearings we've done, they've actually gone out and put for lease on the building after we've done the hearing. I don't expect you to do that, although you could fly a couple of those planes with banners. We have launch sites for lease. But just, again, getting out there to the public that we have these facilities and maybe some investors. And we want to make Florida attractive because other states and countries are attracting private sector activity for those types of uses. Other members have any follow-up questions? Mr. DeSantis? Mr. Benevoli? Mr. Posey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to wrap this up following up on a request that you made. Just as a bit of history for members that might not have a real long history of our program, the buzz right now is about commercial space and a lot of focus by the Air Force and NASA on commercial space. That's why Space Florida exists. You know, there was a time when America virtually had a monopoly on commercial space. 100% of the satellites fundamentally were launched from right here. Under the old business model with NASA and the Air Force, we basically choked the golden goose to death with red tape and overregulation, launch fees, and other disincentives. Many in the commercial space industry found it much more advantageous to operate in other countries where, in fact, instead of overregulating and essentially taxing the commercial space industry, they subsidized it. And so pretty soon we became not very competitive, and we went from 100% of the world's commercial launch business to probably less than 10%. We're trying to get that back now. At one point, there was a master plan signed by the Air Force, by NASA, by Space Florida, everyone with an interest in saying we would have a commercial launch center inside the gates of the Space Center. And what do we call it? A range within the range. We know, of course, that all this is subject to the Air Force's dominion of every inch of airspace, probably from Jacksonville to Miami, they control. And so while it's often easy to say, well, why don't people run in and use some of these other empty launch pads? And there's some practical reasons why. If you're on pad 1 and I'm on pad 2, and we have different launch schedules, there's times when you can't do anything if I'm right next door within a... So, I mean, just some practical things that you don't think about. People say, well, they've got unused launch pads, simply just use those. But there's other reasons for doing that. There's also infrastructure cost that I'm going to put into a long-term investment if I have a long-term commitment for it. And I'm not going to put in that long-term investment if I don't have the long-term commitment. So what I'm kind of driving at is to follow up on your question that you asked for responses to. If not Shiloh, tell the chairman where you think a range within a range, viable future launch operations for commercial space would be located, if not Shiloh. If you would include that in your responses to the chairman in the next couple of weeks, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, and we will leave the record open for a period of 2 weeks, and we'll have additional questions we'll be submitting to the witnesses that we will enter in the record also. First of all, again, I have to thank our witnesses. Director Cabana is a pretty modest guy in his presentation here today. I was very impressed with him yesterday, and I'll never forget standing with him in the VA Vehicle Assembly Building, VAB, yeah, which is one of the largest single structure buildings, I think, in the world. Somebody told me, you can see it in the movie, but he told me that he came, I guess, as a naval cadet and came into that building many, many years ago. Young naval guy, and who would have thought that he would be directing actually the future of that many, many years later. But I was very impressed because sometimes we'll pick people who aren't always the best choices to direct some of these operations, but here's a guy that started out from the very beginning and having experience in the program as an astronaut, a whole host of activities, and then ends up here. So I think it's a very good choice. And we were impressed with what we saw yesterday. We've lit a fire under them, quite frankly, the last year, and so has Congress the last couple of years to move forward the various committees, particularly Science, Space and Science Committee. But our intent is, again, on behalf of the people, and also I think we're fortunate to get the general here, Armano, because she had experience at Vandenberg, sent at the perfect time. Mr. Posey and I had heard the just say no for long enough, and she has a vision, hopefully, for the future that we can work with. And Mr. Smith, he continues to take my abuse and get returns to GSA, and does it all very cheerfully, and hasn't hired anyone to take me out yet. Again, it was exciting to hear from Mr. Kuzma. They've actually broken through all of this and have a number of exciting projects that are and will be employing people and get us to the next level of activity in space competition nationally and internationally. Mr. Lee, always the protector of the environment with the Audubon Society, and went to hopefully go away with a semi-smiling face today, but always there doing a good job in protecting, again, our natural treasures. And thanks, Mr. Walsh, for participating. I think of all the things I heard when you said 5,000 jobs, if that doesn't make you salivate, nothing will. So hopefully we can expedite where we all want to get, and that's in a positive direction. There being no further business before the subcommittee today, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.